I want to thank you all for joining us today for the Journey and Roadmap to a Data Governance Program and how to ensure a successful data governance program. Today's speaker is Randy Conley. He has 15 years in SAP and 18 years of data migration experience. He is a widely respected leader in data-related matters and serves as Utopia's Vice President of Solutions Delivery. I'm going to pass this off to Randy and let him take the wheel. Randy, it's all yours.
So what we intend on really covering today are three different topics as far as how to get started on your journey with data governance, as well as how to get the support needed to make this a sustainable operation and, more importantly, a sustainable governance model. And then lastly, we'll talk a bit about what role should the technology play within your governance. So as we start to focus really on how to get started, one of the guiding principles of any governance organization and master data governance in general is that it's an ongoing business responsibility, and it's fully, coordinated at several different levels, leveraging several key enablers that are going to get you to that point of having a strong master data governance. The first one is obviously your people. The people of your organization, the people that own the data, the people that use the data, whether that they are consuming it, or that they are actually producing it. The next one is your process. When we talk about the process level, it's really at your business process level. So how is that data used within your organization and the business processes that you're leveraging it for? Lastly, it's the technology piece. So what forms of technology are you using to help enable that and assure that you actually have a strong governance practice in place? Each one of these three are extremely important to make up the governance universe that you're going to be putting together. So some three key questions that you need to ask yourself before you even get started. First one, who really knows the data quality within your organization? And how do you currently measure whether or not that it is good quality or it's bad quality data? So that's always your leading indicator into it. Your second lead question is, who knows what the impact is going to be of that data quality within our actual business? So how is this impacting us on a daily basis? And then how do we actually measure that level of that? And the last piece of it is really focused on who has a data governance program in place and how do we measure that to say at what part are we actually participating within the governance organization and at what level of maturity are we actually operating. We'll talk about these areas as we continue to go through the webinar. So one of the key strategies is really around developing a strategy, but then defining the reports that are going to support it and assuring you have accurate information to then support your governance model. And for most organizations, this is a big struggle point. So for most organizations, they don't even have a governance practice put in place. They know that data is important, they know that they use data on a regular basis, and they also know that there are certainly impacts of having bad data. They also lack a lot of trust, really, within the data that currently exists, or even downstream, the reports that they're generating from that data that's actually either being created or produced throughout their business processes. And then the whole reporting piece of it oftentimes has a big gap because the right reports don't exist. And there's really no quantifiable or measurable way of looking at the data within the reports. The last part of it is really looking at then what are the really governance practices that we're putting in place against our master data, and how are we actually managing those things, putting those in place. When you look at trusted data and a governance practice, it's interesting to note that historically we found that only 38% of companies even have a governance strategy in place. That's just the governance strategy. That's not saying that they actually practice it. Only 21% of organizations actually feel confident in trusting their data and the reports that they currently generate. 53% of companies claim that more than 6% of the data used in their business is inaccurate. That's obviously a huge impact on the decision making that they're doing on a daily basis, their business planning and operations that they're doing, and their forecasting that they're starting to look at. 26% obtain information and knowledge needed from their data to run their business. And 35% still have neither a master data management or data governance practice put in place. Those are all pretty significant percentages as you look across how it impacts your operations on a daily basis. So I always think this is a great comic when you look at this. Putting a pretty report on a dashboard certainly isn't going to fix your data problems by any means. It's similar to when you went to your mechanic. Your mechanic's hearing this funny sound that you're hearing on a daily basis as you drive, and his recommendation would be to get a better paint job to fix the problem. It's obviously not going to fix the problem. It's going to get worse. So really we have to start looking at how are we going to start building this business case. So actually then go back to our leadership and then drive out why it's important that we have a data governance practice in place, and more importantly that we start to put a governance organization in place to support it. So when you look at this picture here, you start to ask yourself something as far as look at an example of in a piece of equipment in a manufacturing facility, a ball bearing that's critical to its operation. How can that actually have an impact on our overall granularity of our data that we use on a daily basis and our corporate vision as the bigger picture? And as we drill down into each one of these layers, we start to identify those key linkages between the KPIs that we're trying to track to, those business functions that are being leveraged, the workflows and the processes, and then finally at the lower level, the master data that actually supports all of those activities. And one of the kind of key inconvenient truths that we see time and time again is most companies also are creating reference data, they're duplicating the data, they're replicating and then really abusing that data in multiple ways where there's no clear uniform data definition. There are not any definitions as far as the characteristics and how they support our data or how it relates back to our key business operations and the business rules that we want to have in place. As you can see, this can actually build that entire linkage ladder to building up your whole business case as to what you want to showcase back to your leadership to get buy-in, to identify those key failure points and the impacts on your overall operations. So think of it in this way. If you don't have the right data, there's no foundation. If there's no foundation, there's no ladder to leverage to actually get the buy-in. And if there's no ladder, then there's really no business value that you're going to be able to drive out of those things. So as we look forward into this, we start to look at how can we actually build an organization around the different pieces of data, how they fit into our operations, and to allow us to get insight into really how we should actually find business value in each one of those pieces. At the lowest level is always your master data. It's the core piece and foundation to all of that discovery. Understanding your master data, how it's used in those business processes, how it's then leveraged in your transactional data, and then creating those process reports that support and identify and discover that real business value that's happening out there from having bad data, and how you can actually start to improve that in the business analytics that are going to then be able to support that case to then drive it up to a higher level and be able to justify putting that master data governance in place, and more importantly, building that strong foundation of a governance organization. So when we look at EDLM and the fact that what it really means is you're focused on your enterprise data lifecycle management. And when we look at this, it's really combining both strategies and applied technologies to manage and improve our life cycle of our data, our information, and how it's used across our enterprise to yield the business process optimization and the reporting integrity. So how are we going to start identifying those critical pieces that are going to now help drive those things out? What we at Utopia do is we look at it as really a four-phased approach to build a strong foundational master data governance. The first starting point is really identifying what's your data strategy. And within that data strategy, we're looking at the data governance that's going to be required, what exists currently, what doesn't exist, and how we're going to start building that. Additionally, we're going to identify what type of data organization we currently have in place and what's the maturity of that. The next phase, we're going to actually look at the data standards that are actually being applied to that master data and the policies and workflows of that data throughout that. That becomes the core foundation of then the next level, where you leverage those things to then go against your master data and create data health assessments to identify and sample your data, profile it to determine how it aligns to all of those things that you've discovered in your data strategy, and then what's the health of that? What is the overall quality that I've discovered that my data's in? This now becomes that discovery phase and putting in the framework of what you're going to take back to your leadership group and be able to then start building a business case to put together a data governance organization and a data governance practice. The next level is really formulating what's that data quality management that you want to put in place. So what are those business requirements? What are the data quality checks that we want to put in place? Whether they're a business rule or a validation rule to assure that the data is always in good quality standards. And then the next phase of it is developing the ETL process of it to say what data do we actually have to go back, do an extract, a transform, and a reload to get it now following those practices that we've identified that are missing. And then saying, how am I going to enrich other pieces of data if I have to actually build it out to assure that now I have good quality holistic data that I can start trusting. Once you have that in place, you can start putting in practice your whole master data management, applying those taxonomies and standards on a regular basis, day in, day out, whether that's in a passive way or in an active way. Making sure that your master data domains are following those practices and your business decisions are also following those. Assuring then that your data quality rules are in place, they're being followed, and all of your target mappings as to where data needs to reside are being populated. So now it becomes good, consumable, and usable data on a daily basis. At a lower level of that, you can then start looking at where is this data being syndicated? Where do I have to do some harmonization if multiple systems are actually utilizing this? Or you're potentially replicating it out to another system to actually utilize. And how do I start putting those into practice too and shutting down some of those areas where we've enabled end users and our businesses to then start not following those things and actually abusing that data. The last portion of this is then you're going to see those value drivers start to show how that return is actually being applied. And it allows you then at a program management level to continue to grow and expand your governance organization. It gives you that foundation and a business case to now say, look how we've done this in one of our areas, and the improvements that we've made, the overall business impact, and more importantly, the dollar impacts that we've now discovered along the way that we're now seeing come to fruition. We want to now put this in practice in another area and be able to do the same thing and see those gains in that practice. So in this next session, we're going to focus really on how to get the support needed to make it sustainable. When we look at the EDLM maturity model, every organization has to start making some decisions as to what level they actually want to have in practice, each one of the components of a governance practice, and that support really that overall enterprise data lifecycle management practice. That's made up primarily of your elementary and basic type of governance, the discovery part of awareness and assuring how we can identify these things, making it repeatable and reusable, and then how are you going to put that management practice in a long-term basis into play, and then what strategy is going to be leveraged to actually take you to that point. Once we've actually analyzed that within an organization, we're able to then start to put together a maturity model that shows us a great deal of information. It shows us where you're currently at, as well as where you want to be in the near term, and then also where you want to grow into in the long term. So this is a highly important piece of the puzzle. This doesn't come easy to put together that maturity model. It's something that takes several workshops across your business units, speaking to various levels within your organization, within those business units, to really get an understanding of where you're at, how mature you are within the EDLM practice, where you want to be really in your next steps, and then long-term where you want to grow into. When we look at really how we're going to start building this architecture now to support this, as part of the EDLM practice and what we're actually discovering through those workshops, we start to identify really the inputs and the influencers to those decisions and how it impacts all of our activities. We see the industry drivers that really are our market influencers, our competition and regulatory requirements, and how that becomes an input into our decision making and our best practices. We also see from an enterprise objective as to what the vision is, the strategy is that our organization really wants to start supporting that, and what's our organization's core values. We identify their business, their needs, as well as their technology to support those things, and how it fits into the overall business process. And then we layer in what industry standards and best practices you need to have in place to run your organization. From an architectural component, we look at the business process framework, we look at the enterprise data framework, the application framework, as well as the system integration framework. And then the outputs from that are really the program planning, which allows us to do investment opportunity discussions as to where our priorities are going to be that we want to invest into our future to build out that EDLM and that maturity. The transition state and the scenarios that we're going to face along the way, as well as putting together that framework of a program plan of where we're at, how we're going to get through each phase to get to our endpoint. So when we look at the enterprise data management framework and the orchestration of that overall process, we have to look at how now we're going to build out all of those activities. It's primarily around the deployment, the architecture, the standards, the governance, and then ultimately the quality that we're getting out of it. So when we look at the deployment part of it, we're looking at from a change management and how we're going to enable this and put it into practice. From the architecture standpoint, we're talking about the wheres, the whens, and the how the data is either entered, stored, transmitted, or reported, and then how those standards are actually being applied. So what's the common data definition? What's the data model that we need to support our organization? And the hierarchies and the groups that are going to be required to continue to support the lower levels. Then we start to focus on what governance practices we have to put in place to make sure those standards are being applied across our architecture and how that's going to be supported in our change management. And the last piece of it is always doing that monitoring of what is our data quality, assuring we've got metrics to support it and to be able to quickly resolve any new data issues that come up. From there, we're really looking at two different levels. And when we start to actually blend all of those pieces into it, we have to look at it to how we can align these things at an enterprise level to drive that consistency, repeatability, the standardizations, the operations, efficiencies, and effectiveness across our business and the processes that support it. So we see on the left-hand side the enterprise architecture, which really represents a lot about our data, the vision of it, the goals, and the objectives, the principles we're going to apply, the models that we're going to be able to support it, the multi-generational plan of that 3 to 5 year plan of how we're going to get there, the transition scenarios, and the standards we're going to be applying to those. On a level 2, we're looking at that data objective architecture. We're looking at the detailed data design, the domain-specific standards that we're applying with each one of those domains, whether that's a supplier, a customer, a product, or a piece of equipment, functional location. The source and the target mappings. So where should that data be coming from? Where should it reside? How are we going to get it into that actual format to support those things? And making sure that we're applying those on a regular basis. When we talk about the data governance framework now that we're starting to put in place and we're starting to build, we generally focus on about an 11-point governance framework as far as where the data governance has critical success factors. Those are focused around enforcing new data compliance through standards and templates, reviewing and accessing the needs of your business process and the re-engineering of that, and then providing those pre-approved attributes and values that are permissible for our inputs. So putting into practice what rules we need to put in there to assure good, clean data. And then putting into practice a real-time identification. So moving from a passive where we're just monitoring to now going into a real-time practice to assure on a daily basis we have good, clean data all the time. And then also identifying the tools that are going to enable us to actually do that and the connections that we'll have to make across those systems to assure those things are put in place. Each one of these links are important to really all of our activities. So these should have links to our operational structure, our business performance management process, our critical definitions of our data, and the communications out to our organization, and how they're actually reporting and using that data, the standards and taxonomies that you're going to have to put in place, as well as making sure that you have ownership assignment across the organization. So from all of those activities and the workshops that we'd be doing, we're now starting to build out what that generational picture is going to look. Not only where we're starting at, but where generation 1 should take place, generation 2 should take place, 3, all the way out to your final state. So in generation 1, you're going to be focused on a much smaller level to get the foundation and the footprint in place. Generation 2, you're going to build out from that. You're going to continue to grow the organization, develop more strategies, taxonomies, standards, and business rules to support that organization, and potentially start to expand it into new business areas. In generation 3, you're taking a broader footprint, and now you're starting to focus on how is my entire organization going to now start consuming this, which then takes you into that final phase to say, I've now reached that maturity level of my actual governance practice in enterprise data lifecycle management, and now I've gotten to a point where I'm just now sustaining it and taking on how our business is growing and changing into the future. From all of those discoveries that we've made along the way, we're able to actually now start looking at, from a 4-quadrant perspective, of effort of implementation from low to high, to importance from low to high, to say, where do we rank these things? And where do they actually fit into our planning and our overall project plan as to when we need to put them in place? So whether that's, identifying the logical data models, or it's automating your workflow management, all of those have a different value within the implementation and the importance of it within your organization. This then helps us frame up what pieces, based off of what you're prioritizing, fit into each one of your generations, and where you're going to need to be doing things at what times, and who needs to be involved with each of those. Now, going back to our roadmap, you can see how those things start to influence it. And based off of where you're starting to place those within your roadmap, will then lead into a deeper understanding, which says, based off of generation 1, our 4-quadrant looks slightly different, because now we've got to a much more granular level within those key priorities as to what we want to put in place, what we value as an effort of low to high implementation, and what importance we place on those key pieces of it. This then helps us frame up within generation 1 what we need to put in place first, second, third, and so on, to assure that we're meeting our organizational needs to have a good, sound governance practice and an enterprise data lifecycle management. The overall readout allows us to really formulate a strong picture of that actual impact of applying this to your generation 1 based on where we are, what the business requirements are, and where we want to grow into it. Additionally, it applies into it at a much different level. What are the industry leaders practicing? So we can see where we're at, and how we fit into the bigger picture against our competition. And keep in mind, the overall focus areas are based off of those people, the processes, the technologies that we're putting in place to create that data quality and the standards that we're going to be following. So what role should technology play? Technology is obviously an important piece to this puzzle. So when we look at it, it enables us to do a lot more data integrity and sustainability by leveraging our technology. Utopia looks at it as 3 main legs to a stool. The first one is the build portion of it. What do we need to use from a technology standpoint to put in the right architecture that's then going to support our standards, our taxonomies, our classifications, our business rules. We then go into the fix phase of it to say, let's leverage that technology now to do our profiling, our enrichment, our deduplication, our unstructured data compliance to build out what we need to. And potentially, we may have some manual activities like a plant walk down to go through and identify inventory that's not identified. The last piece of it is putting in the sustainability. This is a very important piece to the puzzle because we want to make sure our business processes, our workflows, our real-time enforcement are all part of our actual master data governance. When we look at the reference of the EDLM architecture framework for Generation 1 that we've been talking about, it holistically looks like this. We've got our systems and our architecture, our IT governance, and then we layer that really across a bunch of different areas. Whether that's the data standards that we're trying to put in place, the data quality that we're trying to achieve, the data management and governance practices we want to follow, the data integrity areas that we want to focus on, or the reportings and analytics, or the end users and how they're actually going to be doing these things. All of those get layered into this framework to really be our core foundation of where we're moving forward from. So as we move into Generation 2, we start to put in a much different perspective of that. We're now starting to add in standards, the enrichment, and the text analysis that's required to improve our data quality even further. We're starting to layer in our real-time governance as part of our data management process. We're building out our business glossary and our taxonomy within our standards. And we're now building out the dashboards and the collaboration platforms for our governance. Additionally, our data stewards are now tracking to metrics and SLAs against those data quality, and we're able to then monitor that overall data quality to assure now we're seeing those returns on those values. So as we mature and we go into Generation 3, it becomes even more mature from what we're putting into practice. And you can see now we're getting a holistic, complete enterprise data lifecycle management blended also with our entire master data governance operation and practices. Something like that. So for each one of these pieces, there's an important piece. The first part of it is really around our data quality monitoring. Creating those initial dashboards using InfoSteward to profile the data and give us that initial data quality read. It gives us that heat map that's really our foundation to that. And now we start to see the next layer of it as far as how we're layering it into our business operations. What technology we're actually leveraging to do those things. What do we have to start putting in place to get to our final state? Whether that's putting in MDG, SAP HANA BW, creating data services jobs to do data cleansing, or building out additional InfoSteward reports that help us with the monitoring. Additionally, we're starting to put into practice all of those standards across really our workflows. So how it's being consumed in our business processes, how they're actually then monitoring those things, who's governing the pieces of data, and who doesn't have access to those because they shouldn't be changing it as a non-business owner. Additionally, we now start focusing on how is that influencing non-SAP systems that now are consuming that data or that need to be decommissioned because you've now changed them from actually being the center of the actual source of data So now SAP being that source of data, and they may be a consumer, or there may no longer be a need for that system. So the overall monitoring of quality throughout is really focused from a front to back, getting the data clean, keeping it clean, and managing it for the data lifecycle. When we look at this picture here, it really shows us a complete enterprise information management picture. And it's all about what we've just discussed. It talks about the cleansing, the monitoring, the management, the association, the archiving, the understanding, and integration. All of that makes up your governance practice, and it's really your governance wheel that continues to churn as you continue to change your business activity. Part of each one of those things is really discovering those key components that support each one of those things. Whether it's the discovery phase and understanding your data through profiling, the integration phase, where it's integrating with other systems and how they consume and use that data, whether it's the cleansing and monitoring to assure that we've cleaned up the data, or we're actually then monitoring on a more timely basis. And then managing the data and making sure that it's associated back to our enterprise management. And then lastly, the horizoning of that data. So when does it get archived off of our system? Over the last 12 years, Utopia has worked directly as a strong SAP partner to develop a framework that allows us to then utilize those key SAP tools of InfoSteward, SAP Power Designer, Data Services, and MDG to put in a complete holistic practice, which consists of profiling your data, modeling and mapping it, analyzing it, extracting it, cleansing it, validating it, loading it, reconciling it, and putting in play a governance practice to sustain it. By applying those things, over those years, we've been able to create standardized templates for industries. We currently have over 400 of them developed across almost every industry. And we've done a full integration of the enterprise information management platforms of InfoSteward, Data Services, Power Designer, and SAP MDG to assure you have a strong foundation to put those things into practice on a day-to-day basis. Additionally, we've built out what's called the Auto Designer that allows us to build new non-standardized templates for unstructured data. It allows you to put in place all of those same practices for your unstructured data as well. And then, as one of the leading SAP partners with SAP, we've been enabled to actually develop extensions, solution extensions within the MDG practice to support the EAM area for enterprise asset management. And in the future, we'll be looking at expansions into areas like the supply chain. So what's really next for you? As you look ahead, we want to make sure that you guys are aware that you'll be actually putting together new webinars that will cover how to carry out an EBLM assessment, how to build a multi-generational plan, and then how to use the tools most effectively to put in practice a successful governance organization.
The first question that we have is, what issues result if an organization does not have any data governance control?
It's a good question. I think we highlighted some of that in the presentation. when you look at that ladder that really is getting built out there, really the issues can happen at any one of your levels. But really the starting point is your master data. And that's where your issues originate from. And they can actually have impacts at any of those levels, whether that's an actual process or a reporting and analytics, or a key decision making at a leadership level. If you don't have that strong foundation of a governance practice in your master data, then it can creep into every one of those, or it can only impact a small number of them, depending on the severity of the actual data issue.
You may have covered this a little bit already, but could you summarize possibly what do you consider to be the critical core technical capabilities needed in the early stages of launching a governance program?
Probably the most critical two pieces to start off are going to be your utilization of your InfoSteward platform to put in place that profiling of your master data and the monitoring of it, to identify really where you have data problems that are now impacting your operations, your business processes, your decision making, and your reporting capabilities. So that's primarily your first one. Your second one is probably going to be data services. That's going to enable you then to extract that data out of those systems, start to apply those business rules that need to be put in place, and then generate those load files that now can be loaded back into your system to get it clean. Those would be the starting points. After that point in time, you would then want to start focusing on putting in place MDG to now start managing it better for you, to eliminate those things and put an active governance practice in place.
These next two questions kind of go hand in hand, and I think you answered a little bit about it on the incremental program approach to enable information governance side. The questions are, how would an organization establish a data governance practice? And then, my company is not ready to stand up and establish a data governance organization. Is there a recommendation or a recommended first step that my team could take to build a business case for the all-around importance of governance?
Yep, sure. Data governance is really always looked at kind of the elephant in the room. And you want to really take small bites as you start to consume that elephant, because it's very difficult to consume the entire elephant at once. There are organizations that have attempted to do that, but historically, we've seen taking that stepping stone approach as the most effective way to get not only buy-in and change management, but being able to identify some very key identifiers that are going to drive business value. So I think one of the key things to do is, if you haven't started one of these and you're struggling to get any buy-in from your leadership side, it's to go back to that building that business case example that we had reviewed and start down at the data quality level to say, let's pick one key area of data that we really have a lot of pain points around, whether that might be equipment, or a great example is that when we look at MRO materials that you frequently buy and purchase, you may be buying some of those things to support your equipment that are extremely expensive, that sit out in an inventory shelf and never get used, because that a piece of equipment is no longer used, or it's been upgraded to a new version of it, and you no longer need those materials to support the maintenance of that a piece of equipment. So trying to identify small areas that have dollar impacts is really the direction you want to go. Another example might be looking at your payment terms that are currently used across your suppliers. You may have well over 200 different payment terms that you're currently using. Wouldn't there be a great deal of business value if you could get those standardized down to 15, rewrite your contracts to be more competitive, and now you're actually getting better lower dollar products brought in because of just that change. Additionally, those contracts that are associated with those now can become standardized and simplified, so your overall legal efforts now are reduced as well. So looking at kind of those key areas where you can get business value out of it, where dollars are associated back to the leadership, is where you want to start driving it.
There's a series of 3 questions that I received regarding the Data Governance Council. I'm just going to ask them all together. How is a Data Governance Council developed and staffed? Where in the company business unit would the Data Governance Council reside? And the last question regarding the Data Governance Council is, how did you develop this department, and what type of experience do you look for to develop this department?
There's a lot of key things within there, but I think that it all originates really, again, from starting small and growing that organization. So finding that executive sponsor is part of really what you want to start doing, to then start messaging the real need for a governance practice. And once you get that buy-in and that initial support there with one person, it enables you then to start looking at a small business process, how you leverage that data, who uses that data on a daily basis, and then start peeling back that onion to say, what are those data standards that we have to put in place, and who really drives those decisions. And that's probably the critical piece as to who gets involved, because oftentimes it's at multiple levels. So the most simplistic data governance organization you can put in place is a 3-tiered organization that allows you to say, these are the data users that currently put this data in it and maintain it within my system. These are the process owners or business owners that make the decisions on what data is actually leveraged, what data is needed, and how they're going to use it in their business. And then at the next level up, these are the executives that actually then consume that to support their organization that they're now managing. If you look at it from that perspective and you start creating a small organization across a simple business process, you'll start to see how it can then grow and be applied across a much larger footprint.
What are the tangible benefits that can be used to develop the business case for data governance?
That again kind of goes back to that same slide that I referenced before. Yeah, and it's really all about looking into where your current pain points are within your data or your business operations, where it's a pain point created in my business operation because of my data. Then going at a lower level to say, what is the actual business process that should be followed? What really should be put in place to correct those things? And then driving that to the lower levels to then saying, who should actually be managing this and putting it into practice. So again, it goes back to that whole ladder approach of the bottom up and the top down to identify it. You can identify it from the top down through a business process and the owners, or you can identify it from a bottom up from the actual data side and moving upwards.
The next question is, what system works well with SAP to develop a data governance program?
So when you look at developing a data governance program, it's all about the support that's required to really build that data governance program. And I think it all really originates from doing an EDLM assessment to identify the maturity of your organization across the people, processes, and technologies that are in place, and then drilling down at the lower levels to identify really what should be done within generation 1, generation 2, and generation 3. So a lot of it is that foundationally discovered through the EDLM practice of identifying those things and finding out how your current organization is operating and established and what types of things you have in place from a people, process, and technology to support it.
The last question that I currently have is SAP MDG a good investment and why?
I'm a firm believer and an advocate of it, that it is a good investment. Because if you look at, regardless of what type of business operation you're currently utilizing, SAP has one of the strongest ERP systems that really allows you to put in and start practicing governance activities. Additionally, it has the technology to support it, whether that's through an info steward, a data services, or an MDG software being applied to it. It allows you to grow, you leveraging those things, and you can continue to grow and get repeatability out of all of it.